Steal from my dead granddad? Lose your benefit money. This is a family-style revenge, so get ready. My granddad had lived on the road from us since before I could remember. He would always play with me and my sister when my mom had to work, and I thought of him as my second father. He kept a really expensive platinum necklace on as a keepsake from my grandmother, as he always told me stories about her and the wars he served. Some backstory now on my aunt's family. They were basically people who refused to work, and were actually proud of scamming the government to pay for their lifestyle. Done through benefits. They would falsely claim on mental disability and being obese as a justification to not work. At the time, getting as much as my mom would at her full-time job. My cousin had literally texted me at the time that he doesn't want to work and just wants to play on his Xbox. They never visited my granddad, and for good reason. He was physically disgusted with a lot of them. So here's when the story starts. My granddad winds up in the hospital due to a heart attack. My mom, my sister, and me show up to care for him. After 3 days, and when the doctor explains that he doesn't got much time left and to say our goodbyes, evil aunt rocks up with her family. So much for being so ill you can't drive to get a job. They ask how much time he has left, and us, wanting to be civil, told them and led them in to talk to him. He then passes away after another day, and we get together to decide how he would want his funeral. Since my gran was buried in Cornwall, we decided to hold the ceremony there so that they can be buried together. Cornwall was about 300 miles away, but we thought it would be worth it, and I still lay down flowers every year. Evil aunt and her family not only do not want to go down to Cornwall, they refuse to chip in even 50 pence for anything. So they decided to stay up and watch his house. I know, red flags, but we were mourning, so we didn't think it through. The funeral was beautiful. Heartfelt eulogies that brought memory after beautiful memory. All was well until we got home. His house was empty. Anything of value was gone, and the only thing left behind was some paintings from my grandma. She was a really good artist, and me liking art as well, I decided to keep them. We were pissed. We went to evil aunt's, and she denied everything. We had nothing on her at the time, so we decided to file a police report and left it at that. Until 3 weeks later when we came around to visit and see how everyone was coping. My mom had noticed some new expensive things. New TV, new PlayStation, the works. And she began to suspect something, as well as me and my sister. Until evil cousin comes in and he's wearing my granddad's platinum necklace. I asked him where he got it from, and he told me that he bought it with some money he got from selling pot. Yes, he sold pot as well, but I know that's my granddad's necklace. We get in the car and all of us are seething. They are no longer family. We needed revenge. The revenge time. Now, I mentioned before that they had been falsifying their medical records so that they could receive benefits from the government. So every time we would go over, we would sneakily take photos of everything they had just bought, as well as my evil cousin's stash of pots, and my uncle's collection of stolen goods. Forgot to mention, he would steal big items off of vans and then sell them online for an extra profit. We collected every text message of them bragging about their many fancy holidays and them refusing to want to work, compiled a case report and anonymously sent it to the claimant investigators and let them do their jobs. A month later, I hear from one of my other cousins. Nice girl, training to become a nurse, and I really admire that she didn't take the path of her family. That evil aunt and uncle got their benefits taken off them, and had criminal charges, and had to pay restitution to the businesses they stole off of. And my evil cousin got arrested for dealing pot. They are now financially screwed. I think the last time I talked to them was them asking for money. Since I came from a well-off family, they thought I could convince my mom. She doesn't want to speak to them. I told them to piss off. Ex-boss tried to screw me on unemployment. Backstory. So, 20-ish years ago, I worked for a small not-for-profit. I had worked there for years and loved my job. There were less than 10 employees at any given time I worked there, including the married couple who ran it. And we all pretty much always got along. At the same time, I also developed their website, using a program called NetObjects as a side job. This was in no way related to my daily work there. I was paid for the web work as an independent contractor. Well, the couple retired and in comes this new guy, George. I hate George. Before they're even gone, he's just ripping them all over the place for no reason. It's not like they were a threat to him or anything. They had been successfully running this place for years, so they weren't really as shitty as he wanted people to believe. He was so toxic about everything. He ended up dividing the office into his buddies and everyone else. You either kissed his ass or you got shit on. He would come in and have the most inappropriate conversations about his dirty antics during his college days, how his wife is in bed, how much he could drink and still be okay to drive, etc. A couple of us complained to the board of directors, but they weren't going to throw out their new executive director over a little smut talk. Shame. I hated watching all the wonderful things we had done as a group die a slow death under this guy. He didn't like me either, and it got to where I hated going to work every day. So I started looking into other options. I ended up going back to school and doing night classes. I kept it quiet at work though, and I didn't tell anyone. It was pretty stressful. I had a young child at the time, and I missed her a lot since I worked all day and went to school nearly every night. I had been making it though, and I was about 3 months from finishing my program. One day I got called into his office along with the accountant/HR person, his number one crony. I knew what was coming, and honestly, I was just relieved. Sure enough, they told me I was being laid off. They gave me a check for 2 weeks' pay with payment in lieu of notice written in the memo, a packet of information about applying for unemployment and educational resources, etc. Then they told me I could clear out my desk and leave. They were both smiling at me like they had just given me a bonus. So I responded the same and said, "Oh, this is such a relief. I've been going to night school and everything has been so stressful. Now I'll be able to relax and finish my program without all the stress. Thank you." The man turned purple. He was so obviously pissed, I was worried for a second he'd come across the desk. He obviously had expected a different reaction from me. He ground out through his teeth that my services as a web developer were no longer needed either, and I was to not produce any more work. No skin off my nose, I hadn't figured to continue their web work anyway. Things were brought to a quick close after that, and in less than 15 minutes I left the place I had worked in and loved for years for the last time. So life went on, and I continued my classes and filed for unemployment. A few weeks later, I get a notice that my unemployment got denied. What? The paperwork said I had been fired. Well, that can't be right. So I called the unemployment office. The nice man I talked to found my case and stated that yes, George's written response did indeed say that I had been fired for cause, making me ineligible for unemployment. I guess George had wanted a little revenge on me for not giving him the reaction he wanted. I told the man about my packet and the check, and he asked me to send in copies of everything I had and they would open an appeal. He said with the check memo it was obvious I hadn't been fired, and it would be a straightforward appeal, but that it would still take a few more weeks. In the meantime, I have no income. Not long after, maybe a few days, I get a call from George. He says that they have a new web developer and that they need my files in order to maintain the database. Otherwise, they would have to rebuild it from the ground up, and that it would be crazy expensive for them. I told him all the files are uploaded to the web server. They have everything. He kept making comments about me withholding their property, and rather than trying to explain the internet to this moron, I told him fine. I would mail them a CD of the files right away. I went to my computer and got on their website on the internet. I saved the entire thing to an HTML file, put it on a CD, and mailed it off. A couple of days later, I get another call. He says he got the CD, but it's not what they need. I told him the entire website was on that CD, but that wasn't good enough. They wanted my working files, and this time they had given him instructions about what to ask for. See, in NetObjects, you created everything you wanted for your website, then you had to publish your creation, and it would make the HTML files. So I basically had a NetObjects file that was their website, and without that file, you weren't going to do anything to that website. But that file is huge, and it wouldn't fit on a CD. It needed to be backed up to be compressed, and then I could send it to him. I told him that would take me a bit of time, and I've just been so crazy busy lately dealing with my appeal. Did you know my unemployment was denied? He played dumb, like he didn't do that on purpose. So I asked him if he could possibly help me get that situation straightened out, because if that weren't on my plate, I'd have all the time in the world to get him the files he needs. Of course, he's happy to help. Right. So we get off the phone, and a little bit later, the nice gentleman from the unemployment office called me. He told me that George had called and told him that I was not fired, that he must have put through the wrong paperwork for me. They made him rectify in writing, and he had faxed them a corrected statement. So my unemployment was approved, and I was going to be getting my first check, including back payments, within a week. Then George called me again. He said he'd gotten everything straightened out with them, and could I please run the backup ASAP and overnight the CD to them? I said, I'm sorry, running a backup would constitute producing more work, and I don't work for you any longer. And I hung up. Never heard from him again, but less than a year later, he was fired, and it was taken over by a management company. You want me to save the company $34 million a year? I'll do just that, and get you fired for it. One of the big bosses around the site decided to be a smartass one day, and instructed someone a level below him, we'll call him Little Boss, to save the mine $34 million a year. Here's what's important. Big Boss didn't care how he did it. He told Little Boss to just get it done, or else he'd make sure they lose their job. Now, Little Boss had been putting up with shit from this Big Boss for the past several months. There's a code of conduct and responsibility that needs to be followed, and Big Boss worked very hard to find his way through every loophole possible that stopped him from slacking off. This included dumping a fair amount of extra work into his employees, but the one in this tale of ProRevenge had it the worst. Big Boss would constantly belittle Little Boss on the mine radios, dump extra paperwork on him, including Big Boss's own paperwork, make him drive other employees around the mine site when Little Boss was already swamped with the extra paperwork, causing him to lag behind on his other duties that he was supposed to be doing. Little Boss was no assistant. It was not his job to do Big Boss's shit. And if he refused Big Boss, that technically could start the process of Little Boss's termination through some bullshit loophole. So here's where it gets interesting. After Big Boss instructed Little Boss to save the mine $34 million a year, Little Boss figured out damn well that Big Boss was trying to kiss the ass of the higher-ups and make himself look good. However, instead of doing the work himself, he has once again dumped it onto Little Boss, and Little Boss had had enough. Big Boss had his designated time off, and comes back to find a massive, and I mean massive, this thing was one of the biggest production movers on the site, conveyor line parked up miles away from where it was supposed to be operating and in the equipment graveyard. If you haven't seen a conveyor line, think if a crane and a conveyor belt had an enormous love child. It has been disassembled and sits in 3 enormous pieces. Big Boss flies off the handle. He explodes. He gets onto the mine radios and screams at Little Boss to get his ass down there. Little Boss rocks up, and when asked what the hell he'd done, Little Boss simply shrugs and says, I pulled the conveyor out of production. It saves you $34 million a year. No matter what Big Boss argued or how much he threatened, Little Boss simply said, you told me to save $34 million a year. I did just that. No matter how much money the mine would actually lose with this massive machine out of production, Little Boss did as he was told. Of course, the big bosses found out, and when they questioned Big Boss about it, he pointed the blame at Little Boss. Once again, Little Boss stood his ground and said that he just did as he was told. Once Big Boss confirmed what he had instructed Little Boss to do, it wasn't long before Big Boss was sacked. He packed his stuff and walked out of the gate that same day. Little Boss still happily remains, stress-free and not to be messed with. Alright guys, thanks so much for watching today's video. Let me know in the comments what your favorite story of today is. And if you're new to my channel, hit that subscribe button and bell to be notified of future videos just like this one. And I'll see you guys in the next video.